Hello everyone! Crimean Tatar Foundation USA wants to thank all who joined us today. For us as Ukrainians, indigenous people of Crimea, feeling your support is especially important, while Crimea remains under brutal Russian occupation for 11 years now. Crimean Tatar Foundation USA is a Crimean Tatar Ukrainian American organization based in New York that focused on ensuring United States support for Ukraine in the American public, academic spheres, and behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. One of the key goals of the Foundation's missions is to convey to the world why the deoccupation of Crimea holds critical strategic importance for the future global order. I want to start my speech by mentioning Hatice Boyjak, a young woman who disappeared in Crimea on May 6 this year. She is Crimean Tatar. We later learned she was detained by occupation authorities, but her family still cannot find her exact location. This is just most recent example of illegal detention aimed at intimidating Crimea residents, something that has happened hundreds of times during the occupation. I also want to remind you that the first victim of the Russian occupation in 2014 was a Crimean Tatar activist and father of two children, Reshat Ametov. He is Crimean Tatar. During the first days of occupation, he held a solitary protest against Russian occupation and for Ukrainian sovereignty. He was kidnapped and killed with clear signs of torture. I should explain you. They left him naked in an open field with his fingers cut off, genitals removed, spine broken, and no eyes. This was the occupiers' message specifically to Ukraine's freedom-loving indigenous people of Crimea. Anyone who speaks out will suffer the same fate. The Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshina was murdered in the same way as Reshat Ametov. Exactly. Every second Crimean Tatar family in Crimea has been subjected to face-by interrogation. Russia imprisons entire family on fabricated political and religious charges, with Crimean Tatar making up 78% of these cases in Crimea. Russia has taken all three sons from Crimean Tatar historian Shukri Seytumerov and his wife Lilia, with the persecution in each case chillingly similar to the charges used during Stalin's terror to arrest and execute their great-grandfather. It's just one example. Russia has occupied Crimea for 11 years now. For 11 years, no Ukrainian citizens in Crimea can feel safe or be confident they can protect their rights, freedoms, and life if needed. Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians must live in fear and suspicion, with broken trust between neighbors, forced to act against their will under occupation pressure. Russia's actions have forced thousands to leave Crimea, while those remaining face constant pressure. When discussing territorial status, we ask you to remember the people's fate too. While thinking about people, we must consider the territory. As long as Crimean land remains under Russian occupation, Ukrainian citizens' rights, freedoms, and lives will stay in danger. Political persecution will continue. Forced disappearance, illegal detentions, searches, torture, and arrests. Any recognition of Russian control over temporarily occupied Crimea is unacceptable, because it would mean a serious violation of basic international law, an attack on Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity, disrespect for their indigenous Crimean Tatar people's rights, justification of all Russians' crimes in occupied Ukrainian territories, support for the policy of destroying the Crimean Tatar people, creating a precedent where aggressors go unpunished. Don't be fooled. Russia won't be satisfied with just Crimea. Since 2014 they have controlled the peninsula, but in 2022 they started full-scale war against Ukraine because their target is all of Ukraine. The only way to end the Russian-Ukrainian war and establish lasting peace is to free Crimea and other occupied territories and restore Ukrainians' internationally recognized borders. Any other options threatened more suffering for millions, particularly for Crimean Tatars, whose basic rights have been violated for many years. Any agreements about Crimea's status must include both the Ukrainian state and the indigenous Crimean Tatar people. The Crimean Tatar Foundation USA supports indigenous people of Ukraine by building strategic partnership, integrating Crimean Tatar perspective into Western academia, promoting cultural and political advocacy, preserving Crimean Tatar heritage in the United States.
Dear friends, activists concerned about the war in Ukraine, today we have gathered here for a special occasion to honor the memory of victims of repression and genocide of 1944. We are Ukrainians, indigenous people of Crimea, Crimean Tatars. The history of Crimean Tatar people nation is a history of survival despite systematic attempts at destruction. In 1783, after the first annexion of the Crimean Tatar state, our people faced the first mass repressions, when 10,000 Crimean Tatars were drowned in the Black Sea by Catherine II. In 1917, the burning of leaders, officers and activists in the furnaces was first tasted. In 1921, officers and activists in the furnaces was first tested. In 1921, an artificial famine in Crimea killed 76,000 out of 100,000 who died in Crimea. All these crimes were links in the chain of genocide that began with the first annexion of the Crimean state in 1783. But the historical tragedy that occurred on May 18, 1944 surpassed all previous ones in scale. The victims of this genocide were more than 400,000 Crimean Tatar, and I ask you to understand this figure. 46.2% of them died in the first 18 months after the beginning of the repressions of 1944. The Crimean Tatar people were not simply forced expulsion. They were subjected to systemic repressions, mass deaths, deprivation of property, deprivation of civil rights, deprivation of statehood, establishment of a regime of terror in special settlement places. Their culture, tradition, language and religion were banned. Their nationality was removed from the Soviet dictionary of nationalities, as if we had never existed. According to the UN Convention of the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide, these actions fully comply with the definition of genocide, including creating conditions calculated for the physical destruction of the ethnic group. Our grandfather lost half of his family in one night when seeking help in the hospital for diseases calculating in special settlements. Medical personnel gave his brothers and mother death vaccine. His entire family perished. He miraculously survived by avoiding the vaccine. Since then, he never went to doctors and treated himself with her. When he was dying in Crimea, he told us not to go to Russian doctors. They will kill you with the vaccine, as they killed my unfortunately family. Our grandmother Levisa is from the noble family of Murza Skarashayski. Murza translated as princess. She was 9 years old when those who thought shoulder to shoulder with her father burst into her door. They woke her up with loud cries, the sound of boots and the cold barrel of a stove's weapons. Today she is in Crimea. She every day, every time watches the door because she fears it will happen again. Today we have gathered not only to mourn, we have gathered so that the world might hear the truth. so that historical justice may prevail, so that the tragedy experienced by our people never happens to any people on earth. The presence here of representatives of diplomatic missions from different countries is for us a sign of solidarity and understanding. It is a recognition that the pain of one people is the pain of all humanity, and only by acknowledging this pain, by calling the crimes by their real names, can we move forward to a world where the rights of all peoples are respected and protected. Thank you for your attention. Tonight is a tribute to those we have lost and a promise to those who survived that justice will prevail.
Special thanks to organizers and activists and everyone who joined this event for your steady support of Ukraine during these difficult times. Each of your words and actions help fight Russian propaganda and moves us closer to restoring Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Together we are approaching the day when Crimea will return home to Ukraine.